At IBM, he had come across 2 articles that ended up capturing his attention, although not after initially first dismissing the idea. One of the articles was by Cleve Baxter, "Do Plants Have Emotions?" and another article in Popular Electronics, which had a wiring diagram for a device that measured the electrical reactions of plants. It was through Marcel's extensive experiments with plants that would ultimately lead him to the understanding necessary to clear, program, and effectively use crystals for remarkable energy work. Marcel's experiments mirrored the results of Cleve Baxter's, in which he found that plants, when hooked up to a device like a lie detector or polygraph machine, would react or send out a signal when a leaf was torn, burned, or the plant was uprooted. More amazingly, however, was that Marcel found that the plant would react to just the thought of having something done to it. In other words, the plant had the ability to feel and read the thoughts and intent of the experimenter. If the experimenter pretended that he was going to tear a leaf, the plant would not react, as it knew that the experimenter was bluffing. That intent was everything, and the addressing mechanism used was of paramount importance for being able to program crystals and to magnify their power. The Wheatstone Bridge showed Marcel that when a breath was slowly released in a natural way, the instrumentation recorded little activity. But when the breath was held and then released in a sudden burst, in a pulsed release from one's nostrils, the recording charge was consolidated and took on a laser-like quality, and the recording activity would be nearly off the charts. Intent, done with a strong outward nostril breath, was ultimately the most effective method which plants reacted to the most, that he could make a plant register on the recording device up to 8,000 miles away. In the experiment, he took 2 plants and plucked a leaf from one of the plants and found that the second plant would respond to the injury of the first plant, but, here is the but, only if he was paying attention to the plant. He concluded that it was his own mental responses that were being recorded through the plants. In other words, the plants were effectively mirroring Marcel's own consciousness. This work convinced Marcel that the experiments were revealing a method of storing both subtle and psychic energy. He felt that the plants were acting like batteries for his own thoughts and intentions. Marcel said, "There is energy connected with thought. When one pulses one's thought, that energy becomes coherent, and that coherence of thought has the power of a laser. And when one inhales and the diaphragm and muscles between your ribs contract, a negative pressure or charge is drawn into the body. When one exhales, a positive charge is discharged." Marcel felt that what was occurring on a more esoteric level was that the inhalation draws in pranic life force energy, and exhalation releases the power of thought. This is what Marcel ultimately applied to his technique he taught for clearing and programming crystals. Although Marcel extensively worked with liquid crystals at IBM, it would not be until later that Marcel would begin to work with natural quartz crystals. It was after a lecture Marcel had given on his work with plants that he was approached by a woman named Dr. McKistry. Dr. McKistry proceeded to tell Marcel that she had some quartz crystals that would vibrate in one's hand when held. She persuaded him to take a look into them, and following the lecture sent him a sample of one of these crystals to his lab. Marcel describes his first experience with the crystal in the following quote: "I took the crystal that she had sent me, held it in my hand, drew my breath in, and happened to point the crystal at a friend of mine, Chuck McNosa. As I pulsed my breath, a charge went through the crystal and into this man. His head went back, and he went into an altered state of consciousness. That was my first encounter with a crystal. I said, 'This is for the birds. I want nothing to do with it.'" End quote. Being that Marcel was an open-minded scientist, rather than simply writing off and forgetting about this experience, he overcame his resistance and hesitancy and began his work with crystals. He soon immersed himself into his research and discovery on crystals. There were limitations to the way quartz was in its natural form. It was hard to repeat experiments as natural quartz varies in its geometric shapes, and each piece is a bit different from the next. As a scientist, Marcel needed more uniformity. Marcel felt that in order to do that, the crystal would need to be optimized by the proper cutting and faceting of the crystal. He likened it to a ruby. A ruby, in its uncut state, lacks the ability to cut through steel and focus light. When the same ruby, however, is precisely faceted and optimized, it can focus light with precision and cut through metal and other materials effortlessly.